Go, Gene. It's all yours.
Oh, well, okay. Well, welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library, the virtual one. We've been going for over 10 years. Again, we focus on the heritage of Marx, with whom we all admire and respect. And although we have diverse opinions about different matters, we are all united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past.
Excuse me,
And I'll turn it back over to you.
Gene, it might be a good idea for us to mute the non-speakers.
Yeah, I think
I'm
that's a good
doing it
idea.
as we speak. Yes, you're right.
And you can just mute everybody, can't you?
Yes.
Yes. But don't mute me.
Yeah, I know. No, you go ahead. You go ahead. I'm doing it
well,
individually. Yeah.
Okay. Well, our speakers today are myself, Emeritus Professor of Anthropology at CSULB, currently with the ICSS in Oakland, and Roger Harris, who is on the State Central Committee of the Peace and Freedom Party, the only ballot qualified party, socialist party in California. And do you want to explain to people the rules, Raj, and what's going on?
Unmute yourself, Raj.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Gene. So Gene will get 30 minutes for his presentation, and the same will be available to Roger, but he says he will finish in 20. So the question and answer session will follow, following Gene's announcements after the talk. So everybody will have 2 minutes. Please raise your hands. And I think for those joining with telephone, it is *9, Mehmet, is that right?
Yes, that's to raise hands. Yes.
Okay, to raise the hand for asking questions. Others can raise their hands if their picture is up by physically raising their hands, or they can use the Zoom's method of doing it. And I think it's Zoom's allows
under
you
the participants window where you see everybody. At the bottom of it, I think there is a little button that says raise hand. If you do that, then we see that somebody or you have raised your hand, and it will be called attention to the conveners.
Right. So Gwen has already raised hands. Gwen, do you have a quick question on this thing?
First, unmute yourself.
Gwen, you are muted right now. If you have a quick question on the procedure, please do unmute yourself.
Well, the problem is there is no such little hand on my end of it. All right, there is no such little hand. There's no little hand on my. All I have is a cell phone. I don't have access to any numbers. I have just squares of faces.
Just raise your hand then. That's okay. You
All
just
right,
raise your
so
hand.
you're going to keep us on screen in some way so you can see it, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, Gene, please begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Raj, and it is a great pleasure to be here. As you know, I spent most of my life in academia, and where I taught anthropology in Marxism. I was paid to teach anthropology, and through the Marxism in for free. And when I retired and escaped from LA, I came to my native Bay Area. And the first thing I did was look up find the local Marxist library and make contact. And I found there was an ongoing group of people, the Institute for the Critical Study of Society. And that's where I first met Roger and Raj and some other people there. So I'm very pleased to be sharing the talk here with Roger, our comrade. So let me go ahead and get started here with, one of our favorite communists, Che Guevara, who reputedly said, "I envy you North Americans. You are fighting the most important battle of all." And why did Che say this? Clearly, it's not because of our Medicare for All thing, or
I can't hear.
please don't interrupt, but I will talk. We'll try to
You're
continue.
coming, yeah, you're coming okay, Gene. It's all right.
Is it coming across okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. He wasn't talking about our Medicare for All or free education or any of that, because Cuba already has that. Che said this because we live in the belly of the beast, and therefore we are in a particular position to put an end to the beast, to lead a revolutionary transition here, because we are situated there. And many of us may think this is an impossible task, but I don't believe that's true. If you look at American history, first of all, we stopped that war in Vietnam. Of course, we had a little help from our Vietnamese friends who actually did the liberation. And we also defeated fascism. Back in 1944, the Normandy landing there, and that led to the defeat of fascism. Of course, we had a little help from our Soviet friends. And here's the liberation, and it was Winston Churchill who said that it was Stalin's Red Army that tore the guts out of the filthy Nazi war machine. And as you know, Churchill was no friend of the Soviet Union. And again, one of our favorite American socialists was Eugene Debs, who gave a speech at Dayton, Ohio, I believe, where he said that wars throughout history have been waged for conquest and plunder. The master class has always declared the wars. The subject class has always fought the battles. And as we all know, Debs was promptly thrown in prison, but that didn't stop him. He went on to run for president and got close to 1 million votes in 1922. So that's very important. There was also the American Anti-Imperialist League started by Mark Twain, a avowed anti-imperialist. So that's some of our history, and we need to look at that when we consider the success of the Bernie campaign, which drew over 13 million votes for an open socialist, which is unprecedented in American history. This is not only more than any other socialist presidential campaign in American history, but more than all such campaigns previously. So I think that's important. And I also want to stress that in my talk, I will be utilizing the scientific concept of socialism that grows out of the work of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, and sees socialism as, and the dictatorship of the proletariat as part of the revolutionary transition from capitalism to socialism, which is a global process. And part of my thing that I've mentioned numerous times is that although socialism takes different forms in different times and places, the revolutionary core of socialism lies in those societies that have actually had socialist revolutions, from the Soviet Union to China, Vietnam, and Cuba, in short, the communist countries. But this does not mean that the struggle for socialism within the imperialist countries is not important. In America, this struggle is usually waged under the banner of democratic socialism, which unfortunately has yet to understand its historic mission. So part of my purpose here is to urge socialists in the United States to shed their parochialism and anti-communism. And unfortunately, this is the American concept of socialism, where we all know what socialism is. We have, and it's a great idea. We need to convince people that our ideas are right. And once we get our heads straight, we can make a revolution. That is idealism, and as many of us prefer, the scientific concept of socialism. So with that introduction, let's go back to the development of socialism in America, which began as utopianism, which a long tradition of utopianism in America, one could say even America itself is some ways a utopian experience, although I'm not sure that the Native Americans would agree with this point of view. And the first socialist in America was Robert Owen, who came to America in 1825. He was a wealthy industrialist, had model factories in England, and he wanted to put this into effect in the United States. He gave a speech to Congress, which was, I understand, was very well received. And then he was going to start a utopian community, and he didn't have to build his own. He simply went out and bought one. There were so many utopian communities. One was in Harmony, Indiana, so he bought that and called it New Harmony. And the ideas, a wealth of very critical ideas floating around. One of these was Cornelius Blatchley, who wrote an essay on the Commonwealth in 1822. And I wanted to read this. He says, a pure Commonwealth would put an end to the vast riches of a few and the miserable indigence of many. Great wealth, as well as great penury, is a great evil and produces luxury, sensuality, dissipation, vanity, pride, cruelty, oppression, hatred, and ruin. A pure Commonwealth would put an end to the evils and oppression of crafty rulers, of lords temporal and of lords spiritual, and of all aristocrats, brokers, bankers, usurers, and knaves. It would terminate the numerous mischiefs framed into laws by crafty, ambitious, and selfish men and legislatures. The rich and the poor, agreeable to Deuteronomy 16-17, ought to pay in proportion to their income and wealth. And Bernie Sanders couldn't say it any better than that. At the same time this was going on, labor, the working class in the United States was starting to get organized. The first labor-oriented political organization in the United States was the Working Men's Party in Philadelphia in 1828 and in New York in 1829, which grew out of the concerns and the struggles of working class Americans. This was back in the days when unions were against the law, and as the song says, but slavery was fine. And the demand of the workies, as they were called, included not only a 10-hour day and better pay, but also universal manhood suffrage, public education, a mechanics lien law, and ending debtor prisons and prison labor. And this culminated in the Philadelphia General Trades Union strike in 1835, and they won. They won the 8-hour day, they won better pay, they won a lot of other kinds of approvals going on at that time, and this spread to all the other major cities. And that's how the 10-hour day was won in the United States. But just shortly after that, the trade union movements, the working men's parties kind of disappeared, merged into the general Jacksonian democracy at that time. But the next phase was scientific socialism, which came to America in 1851. That, as you know, was started in Europe by Marx and Engels, who attended a gathering of the Communist League in London in 1847. And this Communist League talked about the need for a manifesto, and so they deputized Marx and Engels to write that document, and that was the Communist Manifesto, which was not simply a work of the heads of Marx and Engels, although it certainly was that, but it was an expression of working class solidarity at that time. And it was immediately followed, although there's no causal connection. They were both part of the general tenor of the times. But the revolutions of 1848, known variously as the Springtime of Nations, most thorough revolution in European history, spread throughout Europe, numerous, in nearly every country, over 10,000 workers were slaughtered to put that down. Part of this was one of the people who fled the aftermath of that revolution. They were called the 48ers. One of them was Joseph Wiedemeyer, who's known as the first communist, scientific socialism in America. He was a close friend of Marx, member of the League of Communists. He was involved in Marx's writing of the manuscript of the German ideology, as well as the communists. And with 4 of his friends, Wiedemeyer formed the first Marxist organization in the United States in the summer of 1852, and that became the American Workers' League. Now, okay, move on. But one of the first things the communists did in America was support the emerging Republican Party, which was quite different at that time. And they all went to Chicago in 1860 to support the nomination of Abraham Lincoln and make sure that there was a strong anti-slavery plank in the Republican platform. And so, as Philip Foner writes, not only in New York, but in other cities like Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Baltimore, Marxists and other socialists played leading roles in rallying labor's support for the Republican ticket. And not only did communists play an important part in the Civil War and ending slavery, Marx played a leading role in organizing English labor to support the anti-slavery cause and preventing the English bourgeoisie from supporting the South, which was an important source of cotton for their textile mills. So I think that's crucial. And this leads us into the Civil War. I threw this slide in there to remind us that the famous American socialist W.E.B. Du Bois has a chapter on the general strike of Black slave workers, which was a crucial part of the Civil War, as was the Underground Railway. And we've had a talk on that, and I hope people, if they didn't attend that talk, will go back and look at the recording of that. But this also had a huge impact on Marxism. As Marx said, labor cannot emancipate itself in the white skin where in the black it is branded. But out of the death of slavery, a new life at once arose. The fruit of the Civil War was the 8 hours agitation that ran with the 7-league boots of the locomotive from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from New England to California. So that was crucial in terms of the 8-hour day movement in the United States. And of this movement, Marx talked about that. He said, in place of these pompous declarations by politicians, now we have the Magna Carta of labor, which specifies these hours we will work and no more. And Lenin was also very impressed with this. He called it a class act, an act in which the proletariat as a class, addresses the bourgeoisie as a class and specifies these are the hours that we will work. Okay, moving on here. That's out of place. Well, I guess it wasn't. Just want to go back here. Talk a little bit about the upsurge of American labor. One of these people, the father both of May Day and Labor Day, was Peter J. McGuire. I put him in here because he is the first, as far as I can tell, the first homegrown Marxist in the United States. He was born in 1852. His father went off to war, supporting the Union cause. When he was 13, he went to work. He also went to, attended the Cooper School, free Cooper's Union School. And that's where he learned Marxism. He affiliated with people like Samuel Gompers, and played a crucial role in the development of American Marxism, socialism. There was the great upheaval of 1877, which began in Martinsburg, West Virginia, and spread across the whole country. The first nationwide strike. Unions were not particularly involved, but these were spontaneous acts. It took federal troops to put down that uprising. The first Labor Day in United States was in September 5th, 1882, when tens of thousands of workers took an unpaid day off, and the struggle to gain working Labor Day as an American holiday, national holiday, began. And then in 1852, I'm sorry, the first May Day was May 1st, 1886, when the American Federation of Labor declared that this would become the mandate for all workers. 8 hours days would be the maximum. And this, hundreds of thousands of workers went out on strike with overwhelmingly beneficial results. They called, some workers were killed at one of the union strike demonstrations, and they held a mass meeting at Haymarket Square to protest this. And at that it was at that meeting that there was a rally, and someone, no one knows who, threw a bomb into the audience, and that led to a police riot. And when you have a riot, what's the first thing you do is you blame the anarchists. And so they arrested 8 anarchists who were tried, immediately found guilty because they were anarchists, even though they weren't even present at the time. And 4 of them were hung, including August Spies, who shouted before he was hung, "The time will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you strangle today." And Engels was very impressed with this and said that today, as I write these lines, the European and American proletariat is reviewing its fighting forces, mobilized for the first time as one army under one flag for one immediate aim, the standard 8-hour working day to be established by legal enactment. Today's spectacle will open the eyes of the capitalists and landlords of all countries to the fact that today the proletarians of all countries are united indeed. If only Marx were at my side to see this with his own eyes. So that's one of the heritage, part of the heritage that America has, an American working class, an American socialists and anarchists have given to the world. It didn't end strikes, of course. There was the Pullman strike of 1894, where they called out federal troops to put that down. Over 20 workers were shot by police, and of course, they put a union organizer, Eugene Debs, in prison for that. And when Debs was in prison, he spent a lot of time reading the works of Marx, Engels, other socialists, and emerged as a dedicated socialist. And he's responsible for the phrase, "I'd rather vote for something I want and not get it than vote for something I don't want and get it." So Debs was very important in terms of forming the anti-war movement in America that grows out of the working class. Part of that was the industrial workers of the world with the slogan, "One big union, one big strike." And I think I want to read the preamble of the Constitution of the Industrial Workers of the World from 1905, because I think it's a very important document that we all need to memorize, basically. The working class and the employing class have nothing in common. There can be no peace as long as hunger and want are found among millions of the working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all the good things of life. Between these two classes, a struggle must go on until the workers of the world organize as a class, take possession of the earth and the machinery of production, and abolish the wage system. It is the historic mission of the working class to do away with capitalism. So that's part of our revolutionary heritage as workers. And of course, to organize as a class, you need a party. Just like the bourgeoisie has their instrument, the state, to wage the class struggle, so workers need a party to wage the class struggle, and that was provided by Lenin, which we've talked about before. But communists then, most of the Wobblies joined in and went into the Communist Party. Eugene Debs, although he was in prison at the time, declared himself to be a Bolshevik, and the communist movement became very powerful. One of the leaders, William Z. Foster, who led the steel strike of 1919, strong supporter of Stalin, and he was the Communist Party candidate for president in 1932 and other years. We should also mention Norman Thomas, who was a 6-time presidential candidate for the Socialist Party of America. He was a socialist, pacifist, conscientious objector in World War I. And we also need to stress, I think, that it was the Communist Party that was directed, the American Communist Party was directed by the International to pay attention to the national question in America, namely the what they called the Negro question, the Negro nation, and the communists did what they did, we're told. They went out and organized in the Black community, and this particularly in the Scottsboro Boys, 9 African-American teenagers who were falsely accused of raping 2 white women in 1932. And the Communist Party played a leading role in that and was a crucial part in bringing communism and socialism into the Black community, where it was very warmly welcomed. There was also the Congress industrial organizations. Many communists played a role in that. John L. Lewis was one of the leaders of that. I have this picture there. He looks mean, but apparently he looked even meaner in person. But out of that came the New Deal coalition that included Democratic State Party organizations, city machines, labor unions, blue-collar workers, minorities, Jews, Southern and Eastern Europeans, African Americans, farmers, white Southerners, people on relief, and intellectuals. And this led to the many large-scale government programs that were enacted during the New Deal, such as Social Security, the Works Action Program, WPA, and others. And this continued on through the war and led to the Great Strike Wave of 1945 to 1946, in which more than 5 million American workers were involved in strikes, which was the largest strike wave in US history. And part of it was the Oakland General Strike of 1946. So we should think back on that time. The AFL-CIO merged and membership peaked in 1979 when the AFL-CIO had nearly 20 million members. However, then came McCarthyism, the Taft-Hartley Act, and anti-communism, which kind of broke the back of the New Deal coalition. And accordingly, when the New Left emerged with the civil rights and Vietnam War struggle in the 1970s, it had to rediscover Marxism and socialism and this tradition. They also tried to levitate the Pentagon. We're going to levitate it up 300 feet and send it off into space. They even got a permit from the GSA. But the permit only allowed them to levitate it 10 feet, but even that didn't work. There's also the Peace and Freedom Party, which I hope Roger may talk more about them. I was a member of the presidential, a congressional candidate of the Peace and Freedom Party for many years. But I'll skip over that. I want to move on to Martin Luther King, because many people are not aware of the fact that Martin Luther King was an open socialist. He said, there must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. Call it what you may, call it democracy, call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this nation for all of God's children. And refer you to a good article, 4 ways that Martin Luther King wanted to battle inequality. 1, ratify an economic bill of rights. 2, guarantee everyone a basic income, no strings attached. 3, build a powerful labor movement. 4, guarantee a job to everyone that could use it. But in addition to that, Martin Luther King, who I consider America's greatest spiritual leader, gave his greatest speech in April 4th, 1967, his speech where he spoke to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, his own government. Somehow we got on the wrong side of a revolution that we ourselves started. I am convinced that we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We as a nation must radically begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motive and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, poverty, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. 1 year later, King was assassinated by the US government. So I just want to finish up real quickly here. And I want to end it with this, because we did have a revolution and the shots that were fired echoed around the world. And as Mark said, just as the American Revolution of 1776 was the toxin which led to the French Revolution of 1789, so the Civil War was the toxin that led to revolutionary outbreaks in Europe. And let's hope that the Bernie campaign, in spite of its shortcomings, which we'll talk later, will live up to this historic legacy. So I'll end with a message was sent to Bernie back in 2015. Bernie, speak up. War and corporate power fuel each other. And with that, I will turn it over to my comrade, Roger Harris, who will talk about Bernie Sanders and testing the limits of the US political system.
Thank you very much. Can you unshare your screen so Roger?
I will unshare my screen and put my, I tried to unshare.
Okay, right there you go. Right next to the share screen button, there's this little arrow where I think you can do unshare. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Okay, we have now, I changed it to multiple participants so Roger can share his screen as well.
Am I on, Mehmet?
Yes, you are, Roger. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Gene, and thank you, everybody, for
Okay,
coming.
sorry about the glitches.
Yes. And thank you, Gene, for giving us a history of our class. On an historical note, let me just read a quote that was made this day in 1872. And the quote is, "From the bosom of a devastated earth, a voice goes up. With our own, it says, disarm, disarm." Those are the words, the anti-war words of Juliet Ward Howe, excuse me. Today is Mother's Day, the founder of Mother's Day. Happy birthday, everybody. Happy Mother's Day, everybody. And I will start.
Roger, you are sharing the wrong screen, I think the Zoom screen. If you can go back to the presentation slides.
Am I on now?
No, go back to the slides, please.
Your slide screen is not on,
Okay.
on your screen. So put that on your screen, and that will then be what we will see.
Gene, if you don't mind, can you still try to unshare your screen?
Yeah, this is Gene's screen right now we're looking at.
There you go. Yes. Now we have your screen, Roger, with a Bernie Sanders picture.
Very good. Happy Mother's Day, and I'll begin. Can you see my voice?
Yes, we get your voice, we can see you, and we can see your screen as well. Thank you.
Okay, just a second. What Bernie Sanders accomplished electorally was remarkable, revealing both how far a progressive can venture on one hand and on the other on the limits of prescribing further advancement to the left within the Democratic Party. Sanders pushed the limits of the system. Sanders was once the front runner and may have swept the Democratic primaries was an indicator of the neoliberal order's decay. The coronavirus pandemic was both the final blow to the Sanders campaign and the world historic event that proved unquestionably that his platform of universal health care and fairness to the working class was the medicine needed for an ailing nation. Sanders' contagious ability to enthuse the youth was sequestered. One of Sanders' signature programs was Medicare for All. And this was a government welfare measure that was long overdue even before the pandemic. What's interesting is that Trump is now providing Medicare payments to hospitals for uninsured COVID-19 patients, but Biden and the Democrats are serving as a firewall for the private insurance industry. The Democrats are outflanking Trump on the right, Biden and his Democrats. They propose subsidizing COBRA coverage to newly unemployed workers to pay for their private insurance bills, leaving the unemployed who cannot afford COBRA and then tens of millions of others without coverage. In 2016, the corporate Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton advocated lowering the Medicare qualifying age to 50 or 55 years. Now we are in the midst of a pandemic, which demonstrates the need for Medicare for all as never before, yet Biden is to the right of Clinton, the position that Clinton took 4 years ago, only conceding to lower the eligibility to 60, which, by the way, the insurance company was vetted with the insurance companies, and the insurance companies said, yeah, we can live with that. The latest polls indicate that 69% overall approval rating, with 88% of the Democrats support Medicare for all. This support is despite the millions of dark money spent on the insurance industry against Medicare for all. Biden, who had campaigned to cut Medicare and Social Security, vows he would veto Medicare for all were it to come before him as president. So I'm arguing here that liberalism is dead. Noam Chomsky spoke about, ironically, Richard Nixon being the last liberal president. And what we're seeing right now with the COVID-19 crisis is two kind of interesting insights into the system. One is that the important social welfare functions of the state have been neglected under neoliberalism, and that the other was the failure of the private sector to meet those needs. Neither private industry nor charity has been sufficient to meet the COVID-19 crisis. And this in turn raises a very important question, one maybe we should speak about more in the question and the answer period, of what class does the state work for? Who is represented by the state? Shelter in place is Biden's strong suit. Democrats are now AWOL on the social issues of our time. While our nation is in crisis and the working class is being shoved under the bus, Biden is sleeping through it all. And when leadership is needed, the Democrat strategy is to do nothing and then blame it on Trump. And that is because the Democrats have nothing to offer the working class, except that Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. But Sanders tried to push the limits of the system. The lie that money was not available for single-payer healthcare is now exposed by tsunamis of cash being mainline tax-free to resuscitate the parasitic, speculative financial markets. With unemployment rampant and Jeff Bezos's net worth swelling by the billions daily, Sanders had the temerity to say, quote, "If Trump can put $1.5 trillion into the banking system, we can protect the wages of everyday workers." When in the Democratic debates, the 9th richest man in the world claimed he made his billions by hard work, only Sanders was able to and was in a position to quip, which he did, that Bloomberg's workers must have helped. And when Bloomberg offered to bankroll the eventual Democratic Party nominee, only the Sanders campaign gave a hard no. Bloomberg was correct, however, when he said of his primary rivals, "I'm doing exactly the same thing they're doing, except I am using my own money. They're using somebody else's money, and those other people expect something from them. So follow the money to understand who's beholden to whom." That Sanders raised $3 million within hours of announcing his candidacy and garnered over 1 million small donors shows to what constituency Sanders was beholden. Sanders was not willing to simply mumble hypocritical homilies about the middle class. He explicitly defended the working class from the ravages of neoliberalism. And these are the issues that won't be taken up by the two-party duopoly. Now, some Monday morning quarterbacks, on the left particularly, have been unkindly critical of Sanders for not going for the jugular against Biden. But despite criticism, Sanders did what many leftists have been asking politicians to do all along. He stayed on message, stuck to the issues, and did not get lost in the weeds of ad hominem snipes. What Sanders didn't do was to politically critique the Obama-Biden record. And this was because he was hamstrung by his determination not to harm the Democratic Party. To say the least, that courtesy was not returned. And unlike Trump, who in 2016 savaged the Republican establishment and won, Sanders pulled his punches and lost. The system pushes the limits of Sanders. Paradoxically, running in the Democratic Party was both the grounds for success and the source of his failure. It was kind of a paradox. Had Sanders not run in the Democratic Party, he would not have had the bully pulpit to advance his candidacy and would have been summarily relegated to obscurity, that is, in the absence of a mass movement supporting him. He would have been a figure very much like Ralph Nader, who is sort of pushed to the sidelines, doesn't get major coverage. What's interesting is that the Democrats are still blaming Sanders for the election of George Bush. And the irony of it is that the Democrats now love George Bush, but they still hate The irony of Ralph Nader was that the Democrats blame him for the election of George Bush. Yet the Democrats now love George Bush, but they still hate Ralph Nader. Back to Sanders, running as a major party candidate gave him access to a ballot line, to the debates, and other perks of the party apparatus. But the system continued to push the limits on Sanders. Sanders was nominally independent, but he was also both the greatest gift and the greatest challenge to the Democratic Party. The greatest gift and the greatest challenge to the Democratic Party. With impeachment now history and Russiagate exhausted many times over, had Sanders not appeared, the neoliberal Democrats would have had to invent someone like him to keep their constituency from bolting. And Gene spoke about this, that New Deal constituency, the Democratic Party, because the party had problems. Liberalism was dead, and with it, the New Deal agenda, which was the cement holding the faithful together. Then along comes Sanders saying, we must take up the unfinished business of the New Deal and carry it to completion. The rub was that Sanders genuinely believed in that agenda. And for that reason, he had to be used by the Democratic Party and then discarded. Sanders arguably could have beaten Trump, but not the Democratic National Committee. Or to turn that around, had the DNC not sandbagged him, Sanders surely would have beaten his Democratic rivals and gone on to defeat the incumbent president, again with a caveat, if what passes for the liberal establishment didn't sabotage him. That is, I'm arguing that Sanders could have won both the nomination and the presidency if the liberal establishment, like the mass media, like the New York Times, Schumer, Pelosi, etc., if they backed him up. Sanders showed true grit, and he should be recognized for that. He suffered the triple afflictions of a heart attack, the Washington Post, and MSNBC. But the DNC would likely have eventually derailed him in any case. If the DNC could so easily as it did change the rules and take Tulsi Gabbard out of the debates and put Michael Bloomberg in, they could have found a way to block a progressive who was anathema to their class loyalties and donor base. The Democratic Party is not like a labor union, or what a labor union is supposed to be like, with dues-paying members democratically electing leadership that serves their interests. Rather, the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, which is the governing body of the US Democratic Party, is in fact a private corporation. That's right, the Democratic Party is a private corporation. The DNC has more in common with a for-profit sports team who are free to wear their paraphernalia and attend their games, but it's the team owners who are the ones who make the decisions and reap the profits. When the DNC was taken to court for violating its own rules, treating voters unfairly, the DNC brazenly argued that they are a private corporation with no obligation to be fair, and they won on that argument. The court transcript shows the DNC's attorney had the audacity to say that cheating Bernie Sanders in 2016 out of the nomination was the business of the party. It was not subject to being decided by the courts. That is, the DNC did not rest the case that they didn't deny cheating Bernie. What they denied was that they had to live up to their own rules. The same DNC again undermined Bernie Sanders' candidacy in 2020, preferring to run a corporate Democrat favorable to their super rich donors and risk losing again to Trump. So let's talk about Bernie as a socialist. So Sanders helped mainstream the word socialism, and this is a very welcome accomplishment. And when red baited, Sanders didn't back down. He said, we must recognize that in the 21st century, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, economic rights are human rights. That is what I mean by democratic socialism. Economic rights are human rights. I think all socialists would agree to that. But to be precise, Sanders is a, quote, social democrat. And that's a person who supports the rule of the owners of capital with workers as junior partners. He is not a socialist, an unhyphenated socialist, who would replace the rule of the capitalists with that of the workers. Sanders has made clear, I don't believe government should own the means of production. What he wants is a nice capitalism that shares its crumbs with those who create the wealth. Nor is he an anti-imperialist, despite some very progressive statements such as this one. It might be a good idea to be honest about American foreign policy, and that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world. Yet Sanders endorses the bipartisan consensus that the, quote, vicious dictator, that's his own words, in Venezuela must go. This is despite the fact that Venezuela's Bolivarian Revolution enacted social democratic reforms similar to the ones that Sanders is championing for the US. Sanders yearns for a nice imperialism, which somehow avoids messy excesses while not challenging US hegemony. Sanders is receiving rancorous left disparagement, including from his own followers, for his early departure from the primary race and a quick endorsement of Biden, also his failure to criticize the Obama-Biden record really in a serious way, voting for the CARES Act bailout, amongst other transgressions. But it should be crystal clear now that what you saw is what you got. Sanders is a sincere New Deal liberal wedded to the Democratic Party. He's not another Lenin. He's not a leftist superhero. And he shouldn't be blamed for being what he isn't. But Sanders made some extremely important contributions. Sanders proved on one hand that a sizable potential constituency would support and fund a progressive agenda. Important take-home message from Sanders. On the other hand, he also demonstrated that the Democrats are the graveyard for any progressive movement. The Democratic Party is an instrument of class rule and not a democratic institution. They would rather risk 4 more years of Trump than back someone even with a mild New Deal agenda. And for all his remarkable accomplishments, Sanders' legacy in 2020 will likely be that of 2016, which was to be the sheepdog that herded progressives into the Democratic Party and got nothing in return. Now that Senator Sanders has retreated to Vermont, the bankruptcy of the Democratic Party is further exposed. Sanders' plea to complete the New Deal with universal health care coverage, a Green New Deal, plus ending endless wars has quickly been blown away, leaving nothing but voting for the ostensibly lesser evil. And what passes for a liberal agenda is basically without content other than proffering a candidate whose main qualification is that he's not Trump. Joe Biden is sheltering in place and only coming out on occasion to make feel-good "I'm riding with Biden" videos showing he's a nice guy. Of course, nods to progressive measures will be in the Democratic Party platform, and some scripted murmurs to that effect will be made on the campaign trail. But we should remember the lessons from Obama. Obama was the one who chose as his running mate one of the most conservative members of his own party, and that incidentally is this year's Democratic standard bearer. Doing Obama one better, Biden has floated the possibility of a Republican running mate. Once in the Oval Office, we were told to, quote, give Obama a chance, end quote, to close Guantanamo, to pass a Union card checkoff, to revoke NAFTA, to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan, and to prosecute the Bush regime for war crimes. That didn't happen. So the lesser evil proponents whined that Obama's hands were tied. And yes, indeed they were. Obama's hands were tied to the ruling circles that financed his campaign and to whom he was beholden. And this will be the case even more so with Biden, who himself helped create the student debt crisis. Biden obsequiously reassured a group of billionaire Wall Street bankers. There was about 100 billionaire Wall Street bankers during the primary race just a few months ago. He went before them, and this is what he said to them. No one's standard of living will change. He's talking about billionaires. Nothing will fundamentally change. He's talking about the ruling class. I need you very badly. He's talking about the ruling class. I won't let you down. He's talking about the ruling class. I promise you. He's talking about the ruling class. Despite Biden's homilies about the middle class, there is no ambiguity about which class he serves. So, if your obsession in life is to defeat Trump, by all means hold your nose and vote for what you perceive as the lesser evil. But remember that there's substantive unity between Democrats and Republicans, and this is obscured by the smoke and mirrors of partisan bickering. But on some issues, the important issues, they are so unanimous that they don't even bother to show debate. For instance, on March 8th of this, just recently, the US House of Representatives pushed through a bipartisan resolution increasing illegal unilateral sanctions against Nicaragua, which passed by a unanimous voice vote in 8 minutes with no debate and no one speaking in opposition. Then by the end of the month in March, with only what Forbes magazine called a smidgen of negotiation, Congress passed the record astronomical $2 trillion CARES Act boondoggle. While workers are experiencing the highest recorded unemployment, the bipartisan act will gift, and this is according to Forbes, 43,000 of our richest citizens an average windfall of $1.7 million each. Then, while healthcare, transportation, sanitation, and other vital workers remain on the job, the Congress critters went on recess to shelter in place. And this demonstrates conclusively that theirs is not an essential service. So if your interest is broader than simply dumping Trump, but is to pull the US political spectrum to the left and buck the neoliberal tide of imperial plunder and austerity for the working class, instead of encouraging the Democrats to be more reactionary than the Republicans, then help build a progressive political movement outside of the Democratic Party. And one very simple thing that you could do is you could vote for a left political party, such as Peace and Freedom or the Green Party. And we should take a lesson from Bernie. Because Bernie understood that the limits of electoral politics and the corresponding necessity of building a mass movement. And this is one of the many things that distinguished him from the other primary candidates. He really, really understood the need to build a mass movement. Sanders' parting remark on April 8th, when he bowed out of the race, was, "We have won the ideological battle." Of course, this was a silly idea. Ideas don't have agency on their own. The battle is to organize a progressive constituency and not self-defeat by tethering to the Democratic Party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. So we now at a moment where generally we break for bathroom, but Gene also, people can go on their own. They don't have to be, there doesn't need to be that recess. So Gene, you can do your announcements and then we'll go to question answers. Is that okay, Gene, for you to do?
That will be fine. Let me make, well, before I make the announcements, I just want to announce that I got a $95 check from Trump as part of the whatever their program. And so I went online to PayPal and donated that to the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, because we are now, we have a new treasurer, and we do have instructions on how we can contribute to keep this institute going, Sunday morning program going. So I don't know if Richard wants to say more than that, but I'm always give a soft sell in terms of finances, because as the Beatles said, I don't care too much for money. But I do think it's necessary to power the movement. So Richard, did you want to say anything, or is that enough?
I think Richard wants to say something, right, Richard? I think you were going to talk about the procedures of how people who are contributing, who want to contribute, can do it. Some clarification on that?
Yeah, I think, I'm sharing my screen. I don't know if you see that.
Yes, we can see.
But there are two methods, actually three methods, to contribute through PayPal. And if you don't get it now, it's on the email that Gene sent out. We've added a new method this week. It's called Cash. And if you want to just send, it's totally anonymous. You can put cash in an envelope and send it to the same address as a check. I'll even accept small change. But any rate, these are the two methods if you see them on the screen. A number of people have made large contributions besides Gene, and we appreciate it. But we still have a considerable backlog. Thank you.
Means we still owe a lot of money to Gene, who has paid to
Back
the
to you,
for the audio.
Ahmed.
Yeah.
Okay, so question answer.
Well, let me go
now.
on. Can I just say one more thing? In
Yes.
terms of upcoming programs, next week, Sunday, May 17th, our program will be U.S. sanctions, the weaponization of the global financial system, and our comrade Sharat Lin will be speaking on that topic. And as you know, he's always a very good and welcome and right-on speaker. The following week, May 24th, our tentative topic is U.S.-China relations, people's friendship or conflict. And Roger didn't mention it, but one of the bipartisan things that all people on the left, including unfortunately Bernie, is to bash China. And we need to stop that. So we'll be talking about, hopefully, on May 24th. And I want to urge people not just to propose topics for us, but to participate in actually organizing us. because we got nothing after that. So no, Richard is going to talk, I believe, on revolutionary organizations on the U.S. left, I think. That's
That'll be
coming
the
up.
31st. Will that be, what day is that?
I'm waiting a blurb from Richard. So
And
we'll
what date will that be? What date?
ask Richard.
Richard,
could
what
be
day
the
is
It's 31st. the 31st.
31st?
31st, thank you.
May. Okay, so Norma is the first one to raise hand, so I'm going to unmute Norma. Norma, please proceed.
Richard, could you unshare your screen, please?
Yeah,
Unshare the screen, Richard.
stop share.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Those, of course, are stellar, the usual stellar presentations. Absolutely brilliant. I think it was nice of Roger to include Green Party. I'm saying that's the basis on which he did it, as far as I can tell, because Green Party is a party that works for nice capitalism. They call it entrepreneurialism. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Norma. And who's next? Let me look at the second
Could I
screen.
just respond?
Yeah. No, I'm just looking at, yes, please go ahead. Respond.
Right.
Yeah.
So Norma, you raise a good question about whether the struggle is to overthrow capitalism. And I think the ultimate struggle is certainly to overthrow capitalism. But I think a first step is breaking with the two parties. And in that respect, any party that's to the left of the Democratic Party or left of the Democratic Republican duopoly, I think it's a step in a positive direction.
I understand. I just need to mention that.
Okay, so let's see who's next to ask. The presentations were so perfect. Everybody totally agrees. Is that right?
Can Jane jump in?
Jean, please jump in.
I think probably Roger, Norma, and myself are all planning to vote for Gloria La Riva in the coming election. Barring something, somehow they put somebody that doesn't make us throw up on the ballot, which is very unlikely. So I would add to that, I plan to vote for Gloria La Riva as I did in 2016 and earlier. And particularly since we are in California, it doesn't really make any difference who we're going to vote for because the Democrat will win California. And in the other states where there's a chance that they're important, what they call borderline states or whatever. Then it becomes a moral issue, whether you want to throw up and vote for the Democrat or vote for a socialist. But at any rate, I just wanted to make that statement.
Okay, so I have two other people, so I'll go with Gulden next, please. And Gulden, you're next.
Nasıl unmute ediyorum Ahmet kendimi?
Yes,
Okay. Hi, Roger and Eugene. Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. I enjoyed so much. My question is for Roger. Roger, I understand you're saying that we should go ahead, socialists should go ahead and build their own movement. I agree with you. But my question is, there's a movement that Bernie Sanders started already. Is there a way that socialists can use somehow this movement?
I certainly don't want to set myself up as the person to outline the strategy for the left. The purpose of the talk was mainly to show the great accomplishments of the Sanders movements, but also the great obstacles that were put in its way. And so I think the only take-home message I would have is that the Democratic Party has been the graveyard of social movements. and that social movements will be successful. To be successful, they need to make that break. But beyond that, I don't want to give strategic advice.
Okay, Gene, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I wanted to add something there because one of the outcomes of the heritage of the Bernie campaign was people like Ocasio and Omar and others that are pushing forward, and they're about the only sane voices in Congress. And they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but if I do give any money, I already donate to the PSL, the Riva campaign, but I also want to support, there are some Democrats that got elected on the basis of the Bernie campaign. And I think they are worthy of support. And they maybe will form the nucleus of a new movement. I don't know where that movement's going to come from either, but I think I wouldn't exclude those people in the Democratic Party that represent the Bernie movement. I think it's burning on. So I just want to say that.
Okay, so is that okay? Then I'm going to go to the next person. Blair, you're next. I'm going to unmute you. Blair? Yes.
Yeah, hi. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, thank you. It was a really enjoyable lecture today. I was a bit late. I wanted to put in my 2 cents that I'm still somehow hopeful that there is something that Bernie Sanders can do to bring something out of us in the next few months. And I don't quite know what that is. And I'm wondering if part of the purpose of these sorts of lectures today about Bernie is what can we do in the remaining few months? And I feel something can be accomplished. I think Bernie Sanders can be open to choices. Like, for instance, I feel if we were to actually try to talk a little strategy at this time, if we actually try to talk about his conditions of health. And I think that was a major contributing factor to the Democratic Party's reasoning for shutting him out. And, why everyone closed ranks and jumped onto Biden right as the coronavirus was happening. I mean, I think that's what will be the obvious point people will try to make. But I think the reason why they were doing it possibly could have been, Bernie Sanders' health, if he was to win a presidency in 2 years' time or in 6 years' time in a second term of his, if he was to win, would be in question. And it was that question, that's what was giving the conservative Democratic wing their power to say no to him and reject him. Now, if we learn to talk about that openly, I think that will be a really important step, how to build the future of whatever progressive ideas we have. And it's openly admitting and addressing that we can move forward in what to do next. And I think that can possibly ask us the question, maybe it's okay, we can accept Bernie Sanders his health may fail if he was to win the presidency, and we can live with that. And I think maybe that's an option we can have. And if not, maybe there's the option, I'll conclude here in a minute here. Maybe there's the option we can bring in Elizabeth Warren, who I've learned in this lecture today, it's reminded me that Bernie Sanders has done an incredible job to the steps towards real socialism that
Thank you.
Just to two more thoughts on this. He can make those real steps, whereas Elizabeth Warren, she's progressive and liberal, but maybe she doesn't quite know how to do that. And for as much as I like, I think Warren can be a bit more progressive than Biden, and Sanders can be a bit more progressive than Warren. How do we still foster that at this time? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The panelists, please respond.
Gene, do you want to go or should I go?
Well, let me just say, putrid though the mainstream Democrats are, at least they are not going to appoint anti-abortion justices, Supreme Court justices, and the battle for reproductive rights. If Trump is reelected, that will be history. So that's one important consideration. But I certainly agree that you know, the shortcomings of the Democratic Party, but I do look to some of those people that were elected, such as Ocasio and the squad, I think they call themselves. There may be some hope there.
Okay. Roger, your response.
Sure. Now things will get interesting because I do want to make some little stronger lines of demarcation. The thesis I was putting forward is that the Democratic Party is fundamentally an instrument of class rule, and the class that it's ruling for is the bourgeoisie, and that it is not a democratic organization, that the voices of the squad, AOC, and those people, they're window dressing, just as Bernie Sanders was window dressing. He was there to legitimize the party, to bring in people, but not to wield power. And I think that is the lesson that of the 220 primary battle. I see we have disagreement here, but I think that is what I'm trying to do in terms of a class analysis. The battle on reproductive rights, I think, is very important, but I think what we have to remember is that the Democratic Party has what they call captured constituencies, and they will sell out every captured constituency if they can get away with it. They've done that with labor. They've done that, screwed labor. And because they know that labor has nowhere to go, or they believe that labor has nowhere to go. And they'll do the same thing with reproductive rights if the people who believe in that are not willing to withdraw their votes. And that is the lesson I think we should learn about the Democratic Party, that if you really want to wield power, then you have to be willing to say, this is where I draw the line, and this is where I will not vote for you. But as long as you say anybody but Trump, then they will sell you out.
Okay, so next person whose hand is raised here is Rich. So Rich, please, Rich Johnson, please, it's your turn to comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, I'm sitting here very, very happy with the program, and my wife, Kit, would like to speak. I'm going to let her.
Hi. I just want to thank the hosts for doing this program. We are Bernie Sanders supporters. This was our first time to actually support the campaign of Bernie, and who's the most progressive presidential candidate that ran. We've never actually supported anyone before that. However, what I want to say, I'll just say it in points. I do have an issue about the Green Party. I do think it's a very naive organization in many different ways, because they really don't understand the way the government works, which is one of the reasons that I just think they would have problems with running campaigns. However, when I walked by a poster or a TV screen of after voter registration, and they showed how many people are in the Peace and Freedom Party. It's really, really small. It needs to be, it needs to grow if it's going to be significant. But this brings to the point that we need to take party building more seriously in order to build a strong left working class party. But we know that the Democratic Party is not a progressive party, and it really bothers me and others that they keep claiming to be progressive, and to put Biden in the progressive camp is just so insulting and disgusting. But that's, we do have to hold our noses. But I'm glad that it was pointed out that in California, it's not going to make a difference who we vote for. So that leaves Californians free to vote for whoever they want to. If Biden is the choice that the Democratic Party is putting out there.
Your time is up, so please wrap it up.
All right. How do we build a more unity among the left and working class that doesn't depend on one candidate like Bernie because of his age? I hope Bernie lives to 100 with all his faculties intact, which could happen, and that would be really wonderful if he stick around. And Warren is a proclaimed capitalist. I wouldn't trust her after what she did to Bernie, too. So we need to foster younger, rising progressive candidates. Thank you very much.
Okay, panelists, please respond.
I'll pass.
No response?
Gene?
Okay. Gene, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I just want to say, yeah, we do need to build a working class party, but we don't have one, and we don't get one by saying one. I don't think either the Green Party or the Peace and Freedom Party can form the nucleus of such a party. And I am not optimistic about that. So I'm spending most of my time on particular issues, particularly, the foreign policy, nuclear issues, the war we're having with, preparing for with China and things like that. So I would certainly like to have a working class party. And I think PSL is doing a good job, Party for Socialism and Liberation, that operates within Peace and Freedom Party, but also outside of Peace and Freedom Party. And maybe we'll hear more from this when Richard gives his talk on revolutionary organizations in the United States. I think that'll be, I would think, very, very useful. And I thank Richard for volunteering to do that.
Roger?
I think we have so much talent amongst the various people on this webinar that I would really just encourage having a robust Q&A and having more comments.
Okay, so I will go to Michael, who had raised his hands before and again. So I'll go to him before I go to the next person. Michael, please.
Thank you, Raj.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very fascinated by this discussion. The presentations were excellent. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Roger. But one thing that was missing was the biggest thing that we are facing right now, which is the government of the United States, which is which is controlled by a proto-fascist party. This totally different eras, but something similar happened in the early 1930s in Germany. And the Communist Party and the Socialist Party could not unite to defeat and attack Hitler, but instead they attacked themselves. And during this discussion for the last hour and a half, I've heard a lot of people talk about the terrors of the Democratic Party and the weaknesses and the failures of Biden, but I haven't heard anybody talk about fascism or the danger of fascism. And I wonder why many people on this call ignore the dangers of fascism from Trump. Thank you.
Okay. Panelists, please respond. Gene, you go first.
Well, I did mention at the beginning, that we did help defeat fascism. Of course, it was the Soviet Union that defeated fascism. But it's an important topic, I agree. Thank you.
Okay, Roger?
Okay, so fascism is a form of rule. It's a rule by the bourgeoisie, by the owners of capital. So it's a form of capitalism. It's not a alternative to fascism. And when you have fascism, as we had in the 30s in Europe, what happens is that the bourgeoisie can no longer rule by the methods that they previously could use. They had to, which was what we call bourgeois elective measures. So they have to impose a dictatorship not only on workers, but also on other bourgeoisie. and run by authoritarian measures. So that's the essence of fascism. But we should also talk about the mechanisms of fascism, such as the surveillance state, a state that is listening to this broadcast, is recording it, is recording everything we do on a cell phone, everything we do on a computer. Those mechanisms of fascism are already in place. When you look at the first 2 months of Hitler's Hitler in power, he took the working class and destroyed the unions. The unions right now look like they did in Germany after Hitler took over. The unions are decimated right now. So in many ways, we have the mechanisms of fascism, but we don't have the rule of fascism because there is not a strong mass movement challenging the bourgeoisie. But those mechanisms are there, the police state, the militarization of the police, the extreme virulent imperialist wars and stuff like that. They're all there. I would take little comfort in knowing that the Democrats are a alternative to the Republicans. If you remember during the impeachment hearings where the two parties were going at each other, they were at each other's throats. During the impeachment hearings, the Democrats, by a huge majority, renewed the Patriot Act, which gave Trump extraordinary powers to shred the Constitution in peacetime. The Patriot Act is a fascist document. It sets up the mechanisms for fascism, yet the Democrats supported it as strongly as Republicans. I don't see the Democrats as any firewall against fascism. Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
One thing, real quick. People need to understand that there was an attempt at a fascist coup in the 1930s. It was led by Prescott Bush, and they had a plot to install a military dictatorship in the United States to support Germany, out and out fascists. Prescott Bush, as you know, is the father of George W. and the grandfather of George H., and they're still there. So there's a very strong element in the American ruling class, hereditary members of the ruling class, who want fascism, who supported fascism in the past. Just a little historical note.
Okay, so Richard, you're next, Richard Fallenbaum.
Yeah. Well, I just want to comment about Bernie. It seems to me, you know, he ran basically the same campaign in 2020 as he did in 2016. How could he reasonably expect the outcome to be any different? Of course, the Democratic Party would be rigged against him. He knew that. And he acted the same way. You know, he's kind of stuck in that New Deal coalition. He can't get out of it. So for me, he's finished politically. He's useless at this point. I don't think anybody will follow him. I mean, some people will, but I mean, he should have really had a different strategy. If he was serious, he should have had a different strategy for 2020. He should have been ready to. He should have threatened to bolt the Democratic Party and run as an independent. Of course, these political tactics are very complicated because the political situation is complex. But for me, what people don't talk about a lot of the time is the global situation. You know, we do have a war going on between what I call the socialist tendency camp and the imperialist camp, and how it makes a little bit of difference who's running it. I'm not sure that that Biden will be a lesser evil than Trump in any way, any more than Hillary Clinton was a lesser evil than Trump the last time. So Of course, it doesn't matter. It does matter who we vote for. I think we should certainly vote, who wants to vote for some third-party candidate in California, whatever it is. We should not vote. I haven't voted for a major party candidate
Okay,
almost at all.
so I'm assuming, or maybe I'm wrong, the panelists are okay with it. Should I go to the next question? You guys want to add comment to? No,
Fine
okay.
with me.
Okay, so Aria will be next. Aria Can, you're ready to please make a comment or question.
Yes, thank you for an excellent presentation. As always, thank you for running this program. One thing that wasn't mentioned, though, is that as Bernie gained popularity and it looked like he was actually going to gain some traction, there was a huge increase in anti-Semitic memes and tropes. And it looked like that would continue if he had been selected the candidate. And of course, that's meant to intimidate people, but it was looking to me like a huge problem with his candidacy. And I was wondering if you want to address that.
I wasn't aware of that. So, and this is the first I've heard about it. I've done a lot of research, particularly reading and listening to stuff from within the Bernie campaign. And I'm sorry, I haven't seen that.
Okay, I follow Jewish press, and so they cited quite a few examples, like every day. I mean, if I had your email address, I could forward some of that to you. But it's in the past. I mean, it's now he's not going to be the candidate, so maybe it's just a mood issue. But I saw that as a potential problem if he had been chosen candidate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that anti-Semitism wasn't more prominent. It was almost a non-issue. I'm not saying that it's not something to be fought, but think back to when John Kennedy ran, and the anti-Catholic issue was huge. I mean, Kennedy actually had to come out and say, "I don't take orders from the Pope." I mean, he had to actually say that. And the fact that Sanders was not Christian didn't seem to rise very prominently in this campaign, which to me is a tremendous thing. I mean, I'm Jewish, and I think about my parents and what they faced. That this country has come a long, long way in terms of overcoming and anti-Semitism. And I think the fact that Sanders was a viable candidate and was Jewish was a testament to that.
Alan Miller is next for his comment or question.
Can I have
Thank you.
Can I say something at some point?
Aria, yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think we'll
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Let her.
Yeah.
You can let her go.
Yeah, okay. Aria, please go ahead.
All right. No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. So go ahead, Alan.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the presentations. There's no question that the Sanders campaign, the Sanders movement, was absolutely intolerable to the DNC and the power structure in this country, and that they moved to suppress, isolate, and crush him to the best of their ability, and did so. You know, were successful at doing so, despite his popularity and the popularity of the program that he was putting forward. But the lesson that I take from this is not that Sanders tested the limits of the existing bourgeois capitalist political process, but that it demonstrates the limits of this process. And that rather than really looking at pointing our attention mainly at the accomplishments of the Sanders campaign, what we should be looking at is the potential and the opportunity that the success of the Sanders campaign demonstrates for a real left alternative. And I think that what's happening right now is that there are a lot of people who are involved with the Sanders campaign, both at the grassroots level and even some of the political organizers, who were very not only disappointed, but angry and turned off by how things ended up, with Sanders basically, as Roger said, serving as a sheepdog for the Democratic Party and completely capitulating to the Biden campaign. And I think that where we should be really focusing our attention right now is the fact that conditions in this country politically are changing very rapidly. In a lot of ways, they're kind of getting past us, much in the same way that Trump's election sort of got past us on the left 4 years ago. And that there's a lot of potential for the emergence of radical and revolutionary movements in the United States, much like in the 1960s, except even more so, because the nature of the crisis today is so fundamental, and it's a lot further down the line than it was 50 years ago. So if I could get some comments from that from the panelists as well as others in the crowd, I think it's time for us to start looking at what are the signs of a revolutionary left developing in this country.
Okay, thank you. So panelists, please respond. And my apologies to Sharon, who had raised her hand, and I passed her. Now her hand's not up. So Sharon, I've unmuted you. You will be the next. So if you want to comment or raise a question. So please, panelists, please proceed with your answers or commentary.
Well, let me just say that Sanders is not a sheepdog. He is an honorable man. He did exactly what he said he would do all along. He's not in any way involved in any kind of conspiracy to get people in the Democratic Party. And I kind of don't accept the criticism by people on the left who can't get themselves organized, can't even run a radio station, much less run a political campaign. They shouldn't blame Sanders for their failings. I'll just say that.
Okay.
They do need to get their act together.
Okay.
Raj, if you can put me on the queue as well, please. I don't have the raise button.
Okay, Mehmet, I will go to you, but I want to go to Sharon first.
Can I respond, please?
Yes, please. Sorry, Roger.
So I agree with Richard that we shouldn't blame Sanders for being a sheepdog, but that was the role he ended up playing inadvertently. And that was the role that he gifted the Democratic Party, as does the squad. It gives a legitimacy, a left legitimacy to a party which is not a left party. So that was the point I was making. I also agreed with Alan Miller's points. They were good points. And going back to Richard Fallenbaum's question about why was Sanders' learning curve so shallow? Why didn't he see that what happened in 2016 would happen again in 2020? Reading again what people in the campaign did in their postmortems, I think they did see that coming. They were aware of that, but they were in that kind of box where they could not attack the Democratic Party. They chose not to. That was the deal. But they did think something could be different in 2020, and that's an important thing for us on the left to understand. They thought that they could build and ignite a mass movement. And so when they did their postmortems, they thought that, well, we got screwed again by the DNC, but we knew that was coming. What we were hoping to do is really, really ignite a mass movement that would have made it impossible for the DNC to screw them. And a lot of that has to do with why didn't they ignite a mass movement? A lot of that has to do with some of the southern states where Sanders was unable to get a majority of African Americans supporting him, and that was something that he was aiming at and didn't get. And that also speaks to why Sanders did not attack Obama, because Obama was seen as a hero for many of the people, the African Americans that he was trying to get their vote for. This is not to either condemn him or to praise him, but just to say that these were some of the limitations of working in an electoral system when you're in one of the major parties.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go to Mehmet the next, and Richard Rich Johnson after that. So Mehmet, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll follow up with what Roger was, saying in his last comments about the black vote, the African-American vote. I had some questions thrown at me from the audience as well, the people who are in here, saying that maybe Sanders did not support the black activists in certain places, and how Obama, worked against them. Could both of the speakers please, expand on that one? Why didn't the black vote support Sanders?
Good question.
Gene, do you want to take that? No, I can take it if you'd like.
I think it's unfortunate. I'm not sure he doesn't get support. I'm not sure he would not get more support had he run. But this is a problem, and it's also a problem he doesn't his foreign policy. There are certainly issues and things that Sanders could have done better, but I think we need to acknowledge the tremendous contribution he's made, and like he said, he won the campaign with people, young people, by which we mean people under 50, mind-boggling though that is. So pretty soon we're going to die off, and the younger people may make better choices than we as a generation did.
Okay.
So there was some information from exit polls where people were asked like how you voted, what were your stands on the various issues. What they found in the exit polls for the African American votes is that Sanders' program was overwhelmingly positive with African American voters. For instance, Medicare for all. There was just this off the charts support for that type of thing, and that Biden's program was not supported by those voters. But then those voters, and again, not all, but a majority did support Biden over Sanders. So we had some sort of cognitive dissonance. It's a complicated issue. I don't really have deep understanding on that because I haven't really investigated enough. But there is a publication called Black Agenda Report. Glenn Ford is the editor, senior editor of that. And he speculates that Sanders was not supported for two reasons. One was the holdover of the high esteem that people had for Obama, and then the association of Biden with Obama. But even more so, he was saying that the African American voters were very concerned about the Republicans, and they saw that the Biden to them was the more electable candidate, and therefore the one that they would support. I'm just repeating what he said. It's something that I think I would need to do more investigation to have an opinion on my own.
Raj, Nina has had her hand up for quite a while.
Yes.
I have.
Sorry. I haven't seen Nina's hand up.
Well, she has had her.
Yeah.
It's been quite a while. But I don't see the symbol here, and your hand doesn't show up.
She's waving. She's waving her hand because she hasn't found the way to get it on the screen.
Okay, so to me, waving hand, I may have missed. Sorry about that. So Nina, please go. You go ahead of Richard Johnson. And Mehmet, I'm going to step out. Could you please do the moderating while I'm out?
I will do that, Raj. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Nina.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say that I think McCarthy still has the reign over the political culture of the United States, and that Bernie was just seen as left, too far left. That was, a good ingredient for taking him out. And it's amazing to me how much people kind of don't see how still anti-communist from the 50s this nation is. And also, I wanted to add that when you think when you think of people as being Jewish as a religion, they're actually conceived of as Jewish, I think, ethnically in the United States. And hardly any Jewish people I know are religious. But that's not only it. I just think they're perceived as being an ethnicity that maybe fits into what is called the elites. I'm trying to think the way that maybe Fox News thinks of these things, of educated people who, how should I say, think of themselves as being better than people on Fox News or their audience. So those are 2 points I'd like to make. One about anti-communism being, really a still strong force, and then the other that I just mentioned. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Nina. Okay, Roger or Eugene, any comments on this comment? Okay, then we're gonna go to Richard on the phone.
Okay, so the thing that fascinates me with this moment, this whole question, I'm really glad we're talking about the campaign, Bernie's part, what they were able to accomplish and not, sort of the limits, like Richard was talking about, Richard Fellbaum, about sort of the limits, those limits were there in the beginning and we sort of knew it. I actually think more like Gene, that he went a little beyond the limits that we thought, but the limits are still there. So he's a social democrat. He's not really, again, he doesn't call for the overthrow of, or the need for the overthrow of capitalism. So I like to think about this in this way, that there's a dialectical push and pull, or what do you want to call struggle, between what I call the reform movement or the reform demands, the people that are willing to go reform as much as you can, and then the need for, or anything less than is insufficient for more of a revolutionary approach. In other words, capitalism is the problem. All these things fit within, and the solution is to break away from it, break away from the parties that are capitalist, and build a working class party, whatever, and start to articulate clearly our demands as the proletariat or as the working class. So, and one thing that's really important for me is that this process, which now has gone in for a year or two before 2016, and now all from then until now, 2020, and hasn't finished actually yet. So we're not sure of things that will happen in the next few months, who's going to be president, who's not, and all that kind of stuff. We probably have a pretty good idea of what Biden will not be able to do, no matter who says what, who likes him. So I like stretch time, and I call this stretching time. In other words, think in a longer period than 2 or 4 year election cycle, and think more like someone said, Bernie needed the movement and we weren't there again, and all the power and organization that he relied on. I agree with that point. So, so what I'm saying is that we need to think maybe over a 5 or 10 year period, maybe looking back 5 or 10 years, even a little bit before Obama, and then how Obama got in, what a big deal it was, and then the limits. And then also, I would say, on that point about the South, the African-American community, voting community, the older this 50 years old plus from the 60s, that there's a complexity there in all of those people that are either voting or could be voting, registered to vote and didn't or did or whatever. So in other words, stuck with Biden mainly. And that is that we don't really understand, we are not clear about what's really going on there. A lot of the people that were on the front lines getting beat up by the cops 50 years ago now are 70 years old. A couple of them are in Congress, was the same, John, whatever. Yeah, and so what I'm saying is, everything doesn't happen in a 25 or a $2 McDonald's burger. Everything doesn't happen in 2 years or 4 years. Some things happen on a 5-year plan. Some places don't have a 5-year plan.
Wrap it up. We got it.
I think you're getting the point. I'm a little vague. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes remaining. I would like to ask a question, but the panelists, do you want to comment on what comment you received from Richard?
About identity politics and the limits of that.
I will pass.
Okay.
Dean passes.
Roger, you?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to just speculate a little bit about Sanders' candidacy. I think this time he genuinely lost. What they would have yanked him out, that may be true later on, but he lost because he could not garner sufficient black votes, which is the strength of the Democratic Party. So as far as electoral politics goes, he lost to them, and it may have to do with maybe earlier conflict between or tension between the black community and Jewish community in New York, when the Jaime Town remark created tension by Jesse Jackson, and it was enlarged and all right, used to, So bourgeois politics definitely played. And the other thing I think is that in the black movement, there were two wings. One was Malcolm X, the other was Martin Luther King. The Martin Luther King associated with liberal Democrats, and liberal Democrats then created a little wing in the black movement that became petty bourgeois and opportunist. And that may have been the great heroes at one time, but today they are acting as their agents in the black community. And black community radicals have not yet taken control of that black movement. So I think that's why Bernie Sanders, despite his much better on black, for his positions, not on position, his actual contribution against the war for black empowerment and all that is uncomparable to this corporate Democrat they put in. And yet he was seen as more reliable by the black electorate in general, but particularly in South Carolina, which was, that's what seems to me had happened. So that's also part of the bourgeois politics mechanisms. But here's my question to both of you. Here, it looks like the working class in the United States is turning towards the right rather than left. I mean, there are communist parties. We have communist party. There's not a move towards them in any large number. And the oppressed people are not moving towards them. And so it is not really that we need a real communist party because we don't have a perfect communist party. Even if there's an imperfect communist party, they should have substantial following in all these precariat and proletarianization that has occurred in the last 40 years. This was part of my talk, as you know. So I want you, both of you, to address this fundamental thing about American people, why the Communist Party, despite their appeals, and there are many communist parties, as you know, they may not be perfect, but they are Communist Party, why there is not a greater move towards them. Thank you.
since you addressed that in part to me, I just want to say one of the reasons I wanted us to look at the historical aspects of here is that this hasn't always been the case. I mean, American working, first of all, when we talk about revolution, we need to talk about a global revolution. It's going to be a global thing. And Lenin, said the same thing when he talked about, socialism in one country is just one way on the path to socialism in all countries. And we need to look at our own country that way. And this viewpoint has strong historical roots in the United States, I think. If you look back at our history, and that's one of the things I tried to stress, that there are periods in which we overcome our racism, we overcome our anti-communism. But there was a historic defeat in the 70s, both internationally with the overthrow of the Soviet Union and domestically in the overthrow of communism here in the United States. So I think we need to put this into a historical and global perspective. So that for whatever that's worth. But we do need to move on, make sure those—
Roger, your response I would like to have.
Just a few quick ones. So yeah, I agree with Gene. I think this historical perspective is illuminating. And Raj, I think you put, one of the key questions of our time, because at one time the left was predominantly a working class movement. Now the left is predominantly a movement of intelligentsia, and the connection to the working class is very tenuous. I don't know the answer to that. A few real quick observations is that in terms of blue collar workers, still the majority of the active electorate, blue collar workers, are in the Democratic Party. South Carolina primary was won by Biden, but in the general election, it will almost definitely be won by the Republican. So it's ironic that Bernie's kind of Waterloo was in a state that's not really going to be part of the Democratic Party's main strategy. And then finally, on MLK and Malcolm X, the time when King was associated with liberal Democrats was also the time when Malcolm X was actually opposed to the civil rights movement and was actually speaking out against the civil rights movement. Later on, both of them developed, and I think they're great heroes not because they were right all the time, but because they were able to develop. And King very much broke with the bourgeoisie and was for a multiracial working class movement. And then Malcolm X broke with his religious background and realized the importance of the mass movement as well. So both of those men made huge strides, and but your fundamental question of how the left is going to win over the working class, that's a big question. I don't have that answer.
Okay. So we are now out of time. It's 12:30, and I don't think there are any more questions, and we don't have time for that. I want to thank the panelists and everyone who participated. So we'll see you again next Sunday, same place, same time.
Happy Mother's Day.
Okay.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day, and thank you everybody for the very stimulating discussion. At least I found it to be so.
Thank you.
It was excellent. Both of the presenters and the contribution from everybody was excellent. Thank you very much.